This season just keeps on delivering. Now, hear me out. Although there wasn't a fight for P1 or P2 at the Qatar Grand Prix, there was still a lot going on. We had a lot of people out of place on the grid, some having to do recovery drives, and others defending. All of which took place at a track F1 has never raced at before. It's now time to review the Qatar Grand Prix. Welcome back to another race review. Of course, if you are enjoying these videos, leave the video a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let us know your thoughts on the Qatar Grand Prix in those comments. Now, there's a lot of points to cover in this race, but when we're looking at the first half, Cass, what caught your eye? How was that opening lap for you?
I think the most intriguing part of that first half was definitely seeing Max just cut through the crowd immediately, and then Valtteri just having a terrible start, and he was all the way back in 11th by the time the first lap was done and had a lot of ground to cover.
It was pretty much understood that only chance someone could get past Hamilton in this race was on that opening lap, and he just took off.
The pace that Hamilton had was honestly unreal today. I mean, he took off so quickly, and within a lap or two, he had already built up a 4-5 second gap. It was pretty clear from the get-go that there was not really going to be an opportunity to catch him. It was just, Red Bull trying to get as close as possible.
And they also had to make up grounds with their second driver, Perez, who had a poor qualifying, starting off in P11.
Definitely a disappointing start at first, but he was making moves. He was inching his way closer and closer. It was nice to be able to see that there were moves being made at a track that was relatively expected to just kind of be a DRS train.
Exactly, and that's what I was pleasantly surprised with at this track. We saw about at the halfway mark in this first half that these soft tires were starting to drop off, and then you had the likes of Perez and Valtteri finally making those overtakes, except they were all relatively around the same turn. But some of the overtakes were a bit more difficult for them to pull off just because they always had to opt for the outside line going around turn 1.
Something that caught me a little bit by surprise was how early Max came into pit. I mean, he was on the mediums. We were expecting it to be a two-stopper, but also I thought they'd go a little bit longer. Obviously, Mercedes covered off the undercut pretty much immediately, so no real stress to Hamilton there. But it did really make me wonder why the tires were dropping off as quickly as they were.
Not only that, but you also had Checo come in a few laps after Verstappen, and I found that quite strange considering they were following a similar strategy for both drivers. I expected him to go longer, much like what Valtteri was doing. I'm not sure how well that worked in Checo's favor though, because every time he came out of the pits, he was always caught back up in traffic.
Checo certainly had to do a lot more work to stay towards the front of the pack in this race. He could kind of never really have a moment of free air to rest. There was always someone either coming from behind or more people to catch up to in front. He had a lot of work to do today. He was very busy. Another thing that was nice to see is that Ferrari pulled off a double stack. We know this is sketchy terrain for them. Glad to see them learning from their mistakes, but every time a team tries a double stack, I'm like, oh no, oh, it's about to go down. But, both came out, I think, 2.4, 2.5 seconds each. Like, that's pretty good. Go on, Ferrari.
So enough of the first half discussion. How did we score it, Cass?
For the excitement, I scored it right in the middle out of 5. Wasn't the most boring race we've seen so far this season. Also wasn't super action-packed. Almost everything took place in the first lap, and then anything else other than that was pit stop related, so nothing phenomenal. Racing I did put at a 6 because we did have all the moves take place in the same sector, but it was nice to see drivers go back and forth through a couple of turns. I'm thinking notably of when Checo and Carlos went up against each other. That was a really cool moment. And then just seeing some drivers at the front of the field where they typically wouldn't be. Drama I had down at a 2 though, because not that much happened. So that brings my first half score at a 4.3. Gonna bump that down to a 4.25.
You summed up the points pretty well. I scored my excitement also at a 5 for similar reasons. My racing though at a 7. I was pleasantly surprised. It overshot my expectations coming in. And in terms of the drama, at a 3, pretty much all just coming from the grid penalties coming into this. So that scores my first half at a 5. But oh boy, did we not know what we were going to get in this second half, because it pretty much lit this race on fire. We started off with a great battle between Alonso and Perez, going wheel to wheel over several corners, with Checo coming out on top, but I thought one of them was gonna hit the other. Everyone seemed to keep it clean today. And now we were watching basically Checo trying to catch back up to prevent the overcut from Valtteri, who was doing the one-stop strategy, with Checo obviously on the two-stopper strategy. But the whole speculation ended off at lap 34, when all of a sudden we cut over to a shot and a radio message from Valtteri saying he had a front left puncture.
And then we descended into chaos. Valtteri was able to limp his way back to the pits, which honestly I was pretty impressed with, but it did not look safe out there for the other drivers. I mean, his sparks were flying, he was weaving a bit. I think we even got an onboard from someone that was coming up behind Valtteri to basically pass him because he was going so slow. Okay, it was Alonso. And it was just full sparks across his full visor. I don't know how safe that was. But he did manage to get back to the pits, and they replaced the tire, and he was back on his merry, not so merry way.
Probably severely damaged his floor, and it ended up resulting in a DNF for him.
But little did we know that that would not be the only puncture we would see in this race.
Yeah, we thought just because he was on those medium tires, Pirelli expected them to last only 30 laps. He was out there for 33, 34, so it made sense. But it didn't stop there.
Next up, we see Lando going slow and coming into the pits with a suspected puncture, which was later confirmed post-race. And then George gets a puncture. And then Latifi gets a puncture. I mean, what was going on? It's like people were dropping like flies.
Fortunately for the front runners, Verstappen pitted early just because they saw what happened to Valtteri, and this resulted in Hamilton also coming in just to keep them safe from any punctures.
But I started getting super stressed out looking at Alonso. He was running in P3. There was still a solid 10-12 laps left when all of this was going down. And I was getting so stressed for him, thinking, are they being too risky by keeping him out there on that tire that has already been overexerted? Funny enough, Latifi ended up being Alonso's savior today because since his car retired on a spot in the track where the car needed to be recovered, it brought out a virtual safety car. So this kind of eased up the situation for Alonso and any threat coming behind. The virtual safety car ended with 1 lap to go, so they were pretty much able to just cruise on to the finish. Mercedes were not very happy about this though, because it essentially meant that Verstappen held on to his fastest lap point that Hamilton wasn't able to challenge given the virtual safety car.
That was so fun to watch them go back and forth, almost like they were playing ping pong with the fastest lap. So exciting, so fun to watch because all those points do matter as there's only 2 races left. Anyway, now, so when it's time to score this dramatic second half, there's a hint for drama. How'd you score it, Cass? Really curious.
I had my excitement at a 6. Maybe it could have been a little bit higher, but I think a lot of it came down to pure stress for me and worrying about whether one of the front runners would accidentally get a puncture, whether there was debris on track, where was everyone going to end up? And I kind of reached a certain point where I just wanted the race to end safely. Racing I only had at a 4, and this was because it was all pretty much coming down to Checo and not that much else was happening on track because there were so many other punctures. He was basically the only one out there doing some real wheel-to-wheel battles. Maybe there were others that were just never shown on TV, but I found the racing in the first half better than the second half. And then for drama, I had it way up there at a 9 because it was like, you get a puncture, you get a puncture, everyone gets a puncture. And then we got an unconventional podium, so that's fun too. So that brings my second half score to a 6.3, gonna bump that down to a 6.25.
On my side, I'd say my excitement was pretty consistent with this first half. We already knew how the outcome of first and second place was gonna go, so I only scored it a 5. In terms of my racing though, I'm on the complete opposite side. I scored this an 8 for the racing, and now hear me out. Not only was Checo doing most of the overtakes, I could see there was other overtakes happening in the background. I mean, you look at the championship for most overtakes, we got Alonso, Vettel, and Kimi all within like 1 of each other. And not only just that for the racing, but just the battle between Hamilton and Verstappen for the fastest lap. I'm making the exception there just because it was going back and forth, because we have to also consider racing might not always just be wheel to wheel. Those two were driving exceptional races. Drama also scored at an 8 just because of all those punctures. You didn't know who was going to get it next. Those curbs were not forgiving, putting my total score for the second half at a 7. So when you combine both of our scores together, the Qatar Grand Prix comes out to roughly a 5.6. We're going to bump that up though to a 5.75. Here's how it compares to the other races so far this season. We only have 2 races left. There's only 8 points between the 2 rivals for the championship, and about 5 points for the constructors. This is turning out to be the exact season we asked for in our first race review, where we wanted it to go back and forth and all the way to the last race in the season. These last 2 races are going to be intense, and we hope to see you there with us as we continue to review each race. And now it's time to move over to Driver Watch. So it's Daniel Ricciardo, and I mean, this is going to be a tough one for Cass to contribute to the conversation because I think she had a hard time watching this race.
Qualifying was obviously a disappointment. I don't even know what happened to him in this race. He did explain in a post-race interview that he just couldn't see the apex for turn 1 and ended up braking way too early and pretty much sat as a passenger for the rest of the race. But I'm just so happy that this triple header is over for him because it's just been rotten luck the entire way through. There's not much to talk about for this race. There was no pace, no performance. What the hell? I'm fed up. I want another good race for him. Please, McLaren, I'm begging.
He couldn't even try a different strategy on a one-stopper because we saw how that went for Lando and he ended up getting a puncture. It would have been even far worse had Ricciardo gotten one. But his car did make it to the finish line, unlike the last race where he had a mechanical problem.
Pain.
So improvement there?
Pain.
1 like equals 1 prayer for Ricciardo.
And my suffering.
Anyway, that's going to conclude it for this race review. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave it a like, hit that subscribe button, and we will catch you in our next video.
Bye.